Joe Siprut, welcome to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, indeed. I'm very excited for this conversation because I'm in technology sales, so I do enjoy some business dialogue. I'm also producing documentaries, so I enjoy some dialogue around that. I know you have experience across both of those areas, obviously doing a lot with Beat the Streets and with USA Wrestling in general. But let's just start. I've read so many articles about you, and one of the philosophies for you that comes through is that, well, there's two. One is that life is meant to be enjoyed. And then the second one is you're all about authenticity and being honest. And that may seem obvious, but I think you really take it to the extreme in your business dealings, and that's just the kind of person you are. So I don't know what you want to start with, but I'd just love to know how you came to either of those two philosophies.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think you're right. I do like to think of myself as being, authenticity above all in terms of an operating philosophy in life and business and everything else. I think that it's a journey to get to that point. I think that it's one of those things that, has the risk of sounding like a cliche unless you really understand and adopt at all levels what that means. So, in business, for example, I was a lawyer before I became a professional investor and fund manager, and we can talk a little bit about that. But, as a lawyer, just to take one example, if you ever walk into court and you see lawyers argue, the typical sort of bluster is like, oh, Your Honor, that's outrageous. My client is virtuous, and the other guy is sinful, and life is that black and white. It's very inauthentic seeming. But if you look at a good lawyer, a really good lawyer, the advocacy is different. The advocacy is more like, yes, Your Honor, this is exactly where the weaknesses of my case are. This is the problem. This is the limit of the law. But here's why I think we win. Here's the point of distinction. So there's a certain honesty that comes with advocacy that takes years to evolve and adopt. But once I struck on that as a lawyer, I realized this is just a better way to live life. And in business and all walks of life, just sort of coming right down the middle and saying, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. It's effective, and it's also easier than trying to make it up.
It's a lot easier. And it also takes a lot of pressure off your back because you know that when you're done with the dealing, nothing is going to come back to get you. Whatever's done there is done, and you can move on.
Yeah, exactly. And people remember that. And so if you're playing a long-term game, especially, I think people really appreciate the fact that they can deal with someone who tells the truth.
And when you say you stumbled upon that, was that something that happened at Novak and Macy, the first firm you were at, or after you had started your own business?
Yeah, I'd say it was a process. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of confidence to just be yourself and to be authentic, as I like to say. And so I would say certainly the roots were planted at my first job out of law school. I graduated in law school in 2003. And so, yes, it was a process early on, but it does take a tremendous amount of confidence and steadiness to be able to really sort of stay the line and resist the temptation to kind of inflate yourself and to inflate your position if you're a lawyer. And so that's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens over time. But I'm convinced that the wrestling background was part of what made that possible, because there's a certain type of confidence that comes from wrestling and that those who have wrestled have.
Yeah.
And it was really a matter of just putting it all together. So, how long did that take me? Gosh, probably at least 8 years after law school, maybe more.
And you said it stems from your time wrestling. I know you're a big supporter at many levels, but the articles I found, you said that your dad wrestled. So was your dad the Joe Siprut who went to UIC and was an NCAA All-American? He
was an All-American over at UIC back in the early 70s. And so I grew up with that kind of environment. When I was 4 years old, 5 years old, and maybe even earlier than that, we were always wrestling in the house and learning the fundamentals. I didn't actually join organized wrestling until I was in 8th grade, though. I was playing baseball and basketball and football and things like that when I was in junior high, and I finally got into the IKWF as an 8th grader. It's sort of an interesting question, when do you get your kids involved in the sport?
Mhm.
Nowadays, sometimes it feels like if you don't start by the age of 4, you're over the hill. But back then, I think there was a philosophy of having a more well-balanced childhood. And, it's nice to be able to throw a baseball at a picnic and not
Yeah.
look like an idiot, right? I know a lot of wrestlers who can't throw a football or can't throw a spiral. So
Mhm.
it's nice to be a little bit well-rounded. But when I was in the IKWF in 8th grade, that was like the golden era of the IKWF with like the Harvey Twisters.
Yeah.
The first meet I ever went to was against the Harvey Twisters, and like half the guys on that team ended up being like NCAA champions. You had the Williams brothers, you had Tony Davis, all these guys like that. So I saw those guys wrestle, and I thought, my God, it doesn't look like that when I wrestle. I must not be very good at this sport. But it was, in my defense, those guys were pretty high level. So that's when I started.
Is there anything more intimidating than going to a kids tournament and singing the Harvey Twisters if you're not on that team?
There isn't. Like my jaw was on the floor, and I was like, okay, I don't know if this sport's for me, because I just saw that guy literally rip that other guy's arms off, and that doesn't seem like fun. But those guys were pretty good. Even at the age of how old were we? 11, 12, 13. I mean, we had kids on our team that were cutting 10 pounds to drop from 70 pounds to make 60 pounds. People were very hardcore. But that's the nature of the sport. You got to instill that discipline and that work ethic early on.
Yeah, it's so true. And you look at that team. I was in IKWF in like 2002, and that was the first year they were back from IWF, and so we got to the state tournament at Rockford. And I'll never forget being in the warm up area and seeing 60 kids in red warm ups, hoods on, not talking to anyone. I'm like, God, that's the Twisters right there. I was terrified being a country boy. It's so funny how many people in Illinois talk about those guys, and as they should. They're a dominant team. So when you look at your career, I always like to look at the big turning points. Was it for you going away to Marquette for the first time, or was law school the big one where you said, shit, I'm in it now. This is a whole new world, and I up back against the wall and I'm fighting?
Yeah, I think it was law school. I think that when I went to college, I majored in social philosophy. So that was basically a pre-law major, because if I hadn't gone to law school, I'm not sure what I would have done with the philosophy degree.
Yeah.
I limited myself and boxed myself in. So it was basically all in on law school. And I took a year off before law school and kind of just decompressed. I worked at a law firm just to get some experience, but gave my brain a little bit of a rest. And then when I was in law school, I was all in. And that's really where I came alive and began to really thrive academically, because I was really interested for the first time, a little bit in college, but really in law school. That was the first time where I was really, really interested in what I was learning. And it changed the way that I view the world. I often say that the two times in my life where my brain exploded were in my freshman year of college, when I took a philosophy course for the first time, the philosophy of human nature or something like that, which really changed the way I think. And then for the second time, and even more so, first year of law school, when I took contracts, and never saw the world the same way again after that, which was cool. It was very empowering.
How do you mean you never saw the world the same again after that?
Because things were just switched on. Like my ability to understand relationships and, at a human level, politically, legally, business-wise, at all levels, like I just understood, where the pressure points were and how structures work and how they're all built on contracts, and, how to navigate those systems. I mean, it's like giving someone the tools for life that they never had before, and then turning them loose. It was very fun. And so I look back on those times fondly. And then by the time I got to my third year of law school, I had senioritis and I was mostly mentally checked out. But the first 2 years, it was pretty cool.
And did you know you were ultra competitive type A like that before you got in there, or did that bring it out in you?
No, I think I knew that. To be honest with you, I tried to stay out of the competition mindset in law school. I wasn't really, a lot of people do bring that mindset in there, and it's a little bit of a zero-sum game mentality. I have to root for the other guy to fail. because then I'll do better. I never really adopted that mindset in law school. It was more like, look, I'm just going to do my thing. And as long as I do well, everything else will take care of itself. Mm-hmm. And it's a better way to stay sane, I think, during law school. But as a person in general, yeah, absolutely. The competitive mindset was always there. And that's partly what drew me to wrestling and partly what wrestling created for me.
Yeah, and I just love people in business who have that wrestling background, whether it's state champ, they wrestled for a year in middle school or 5 years or whatever, it's there and it's ever present. And I just, I love following your career because you get into the firm we mentioned earlier. I think it's Novak and Macy. And I read that one of your mentors there, life-changing mentors, this guy named Steve Weiss. What did he teach you, or what have you learned from him that's really been fundamental to your core beliefs?
Yeah, Steve Weiss was at Schaff and Weiss, which was just after Novak and Macy. He was, we're talking about authenticity. That person, more than anyone else, really helped me understand the power of authenticity and just how effective it can be and how hard it is, honestly, to master and adopt and to really own. Because he was a very, very successful lawyer. And but when I met him, just disarmingly sort of laid back and, just a nice guy, no air about him, no pretense. When you see him argue in court, it was kind of that thing I mentioned where it was just right down the middle, no BS. Judge, here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Here's where the law is. Here's where we are. And so here's what I'm asking you to do for me, as opposed to the bluster and, the puffery that you see on TV or that you will often see in a courtroom in real life. That was one of the first times I saw a guy at the highest level just come right down the middle. And I thought, wow, that's really how it's done. And so I like to think that, that was one of the first key models I had for that. And he's a pretty good golfer too.
I know you love golfing. I wish I shared that passion. I just have not found it yet, but speaking of passions, did you ever do jiu-jitsu? Are you an active jiu-jitsu guy?
I did. So I never wrestled in college. It's probably one of my great regrets, actually, is not wrestling in college. But by the time I finished my high school career, I had a bunch of injuries. I was very burnt out. I cut a lot of weight my senior year. And I was, I don't think that I was ready to go back into it freshman year of college. So I never quite got started with it. Mm-hmm. But as a result of that, I always had a chip on my shoulder, and I always had, a little something extra in the tank. I knew that I hadn't spent yet. And so after college, when I was in law school, I started in jiu-jitsu. And, the Wrestling Foundation works incredibly well for jiu-jitsu, as of course you know. And it was a great way for me to be around the sport. And 75% of anything I ever did in the jiu-jitsu room was just wrestling. I mean, I would just, I walked in as a white belt on like day one, and I was able to, compete with the purple belts and the brown belts just based on the wrestling base. I will say, by the way, that is one of the things that probably held me back and other wrestlers back, is because we hate being on our backs so much. It's very hard to learn the guard and learn proper jiu-jitsu technique when you're relying so much on wrestling. So that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
It was a great way to stay around with the sport, which I did when I was in my early and mid 20s.
I also love the article you wrote on how wrestling needs a belt system like jiu-jitsu. And I think you're spot on there, or at least some way to differentiate the levels, because think about going to a jiu-jitsu tournament. I'm a white belt and I get stuck up with a black belt and I must think I suck. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, that would never happen, so I just love your thoughts on that.
Exactly. So by the way, I commend you on your research. You're pulling out all the stuff from years ago. I wrote that article probably 15 years ago. It was called The Merits of the Belt System. And the basic thesis was that wrestling, in martial arts, everyone knows about the belts, right? Like you're in a conversation with someone and you tell them you're in martial arts. What's the first thing they say? What belt are you, right? And so it's a good way to measure your progress. And more importantly, it's a good way to develop a sense of pride and sort of ownership over the process for young people, and a way to track your progress and your achievements. I think in wrestling, that's missing. And I think particularly, the younger kids, at like the IKWF level, if we could translate it into a belt system, I think people would stick with it more and would understand the nature of progressing more than they do now. I also think, by the way, that later in life, we would be able to recruit many more people into the sport or keep them in the sport. I competed, believe it or not, competitively as recently as like 3 years ago. Because I started competing in the old man tournaments. I got an itch to get
No
back.
way.
Yeah. There's a club called the Chicago Wrestling Club with guys in there, all shapes and sizes. I mean, there are some guys in there who are like post-collegiate or just wrapping up collegiate who are like D1 All-Americans. There are like guys from, Russia or the Ukraine in there who are literally like world, caliber athletes. And then there are, 65-year-old men in there who wrestled in college or high school, 300 years ago, and basically are just trying to push a little bit to break a sweat. And you've got everything in between, right? So when I tell friends, or when I told friends at the time that I was doing that, the common reaction I got was, well, why? And what struck me about that is, if I would have told them I was doing jiu-jitsu, no one would say why. If I told them that I was doing, swimming, no one would say why. But when I tell them I'm doing wrestling at, 40 years old plus, everyone says, well, why the hell would you do that? So, I think that the belt system is an example of where that's how you keep people in the sport, is that you create a system where people of all age have a way to progress and to measure their progress and to stick with it.
And I love that at the kid level, it de-emphasizes external results, because you could advance through the belt system all through your own merit simply by persistence and being disciplined in class, irrespective if you win anything. Whereas like in youth wrestling, I feel like if you don't qualify for state, you think you're a nobody, but really that doesn't even matter,
That's exactly right. Perfect example, like that kid who basically gets throttled by someone, in the Harvey Twisters, right? Goes home and he's like, well, I pretty much suck at wrestling. It's like, well, no, you're a green belt or you're a brown belt or whatever it is. Like, that's something to be really proud of. And that's something that most people don't have. So I really believe that the belt system ought to be incorporated in some way. But wrestling is slow to change things, as we know.
A lot of tradition, but I think there is hope. There's some organizations that are doing kind of like the novice bracket, or even if there's not like 7 belts like there is in jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, if there's just like 3, like, I don't know, like expert, mediate, novice, I think that would do a lot, just because, youth wrestling is so competitive, and like, you feel like you're forced to specialize when everyone knows deep down that's not the answer for raising the best athlete or even the best kid,
100%.
So,
yeah.
I'm with you on that. I'm also I don't know if you're with me on this, but I also think wrestling could go a long way to bring in like no-gi rash guards versus singlets, because there's a lot of kids that don't wrestle because the singlets, and I just think the no-gi rash guards look pretty fine to me. So I don't know where you're at on that one.
I agree with you. I think that anything that we can do to get kids in the sport and keep them in at an early age without scaring them away is a good thing. I think it's got to be, that being said, we got to make good style choices, and I don't want it to look like a practice uniform, right? So it's got to be slick. Yeah. But I do think that, the singlet is a bit old school, and probably we need to evolve.
Well, you're a man of style, so we'll let you design them, let you give your seal of approval. And, with all the wrestling background you have and in some of the competitiveness, obviously, that you've displayed through jiu-jitsu or veterans wrestling, I want to dive back into business a little bit, because I love hearing about like the crux point when you just said, I got to start my own business. I got to make it on my own. How long had you been thinking about it before you made the jump?
Yeah, probably about 2 years. It was kind of like an itch. I mean, when I started my career, initially my thinking was focus first and foremost on developing your skills, learn the craft from those who have mastered it, and really try and forge a reputation as someone who inspires confidence. That was basically the way that I went about the early part of my career. But I knew I was an entrepreneur by nature or by spirit. And I knew that at some point I wanted to do my own thing and start my own firm. Then it just becomes a question of timing. So here's my philosophy on this. I truly believe that starting a business, whether it's a law firm or a hardware store or whatever, when you start a business, it's like having a kid. there's never going to be a perfect time to do it. You just do it. And then once you do it, you're like, all right, well, I've got this now. And then you just have to figure it out, right? So the basic way that I did it was, I call this hurling yourself over a cliff. When you want to do something that requires a little bit of a push, and you think to yourself, well, maybe tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and you think maybe next week. There's always going to be some better point in time when you think you could do it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you don't want 20 years to go by and you still haven't done it. So what you do is you hurl yourself over the cliff. And in practice, what that meant for me is I came home one night and I had about 5 scotches, and I sent a blast email to everyone that I know announcing that I had started my own law firm. and then I went to bed, and then I woke up the next morning sober, and I looked at the emails and I thought, well, I guess it's official, and I got to do it now. And so that was me hurling myself over the cliff and giving myself no outs, and then, figuring out a way to make it work. And that's what happened.
Oh man, you just went for it. And did you regret it the next morning when you sent that email out, or you just lived with it and went on?
No, I was excited. Yeah. And that, and then having given myself no choice in the matter at that point, I was just all in. And then the only thing you're thinking about is moving forward and how do I put the pieces together, and, and let's make it happen, because, failure is not an option now.
Not at that point. And, once you're in the swing of it, you're in the months 4, 5, 6, 7. I got to imagine someone who has the kind of success you do in the legal world has a tremendous work ethic. So what kind of hours were you putting in when you were in the thick of your career, like you're in the prime of it?
Crazy hours. I mean, not just because of lawyers work, long hours, everyone knows, but I was in litigation, and even more specifically, I was in corporate litigation. So I found like the one area that, perhaps among all areas of the law really required just tremendous long hours. And, especially for short bursts of time, like there might be like days or weeks in particular for a TRO or an injunction or something where it's nearly like 24 hours a day. I did that a lot in the early part of my career. And not that every day was like that, but I mean, I was always willing to do it, and I was always able to do it. And I will say, tying this back to the wrestling, I am firmly convinced that the only reason I was able to do that and not only survive it, but excel in those situations is because I had survived wrestling and gone through wrestling. And I truly believe that wrestling is unique among all sports in this exact way. I mean, someone who plays high school football or basketball or whatever, there are benefits to be sure, but they cannot, or high school, whatever, but they cannot say what only wrestlers can say, in my opinion, which is that there is nothing quite like, going through a wrestling practice or surviving a 6-minute match with another man standing across from you on a mat when it's just you and him. The level that you need to access in yourself to be able to do that is something that makes the entire rest of your life easier. And that really paid off for me in a direct, tangible way as a young lawyer, or frankly, even not that long ago in my investment career, where I had to just dig deep and get work product out of myself that required physical stamina and strength that I was able to dwell on my wrestling, because I knew that if I could survive the wrestling, I could do anything and not shrink from a challenge. So that's my long answer to your question, but there's absolutely a connection.
And it's cool because a lot of times in the wrestling world, we get, you hear it all the time, how important wrestling is. But then when you talk to someone like yourself, who's been out there in the shark infested waters of high level litigation, and you hear someone like you say it, it's like, man, we got to remember how special this sport is, and got to remember how exceptional these youth clubs and these beat the streets clubs are, because they're the ones really doing it at the grass level. It's like, it's not the Iowas, the Oklahoma States. That's fun, but really it's just the middle school clubs out there who are getting it done.
It's so true. And Beat the Streets is a great example. I mean, Mike Powell, who runs Beat the Streets Chicago, is just a poster child for someone who's able to, instill these types of benefits in his kids, and who's a great spokesperson for the sport. And as we were chatting about briefly earlier, Mike Powell is one of my all-time favorite people. I think he's one of the greatest people that's ever walked planet Earth, honestly. He's just a great guy. All the things, personal challenges that he's overcome in his story, and the inspiration that he serves as, and the way that he inspires his kids, it's really incredible. So I love the way that he talks about this and thinks about this, but it's all about the youth movements. You're right. The guys at the college level, the D1 college level, I mean, those are professional athletes, right? So when we talk about changing lives, we don't need to necessarily talk about or start the conversation at the college wrestling level. We're talking about the junior high level, the local programs, the youth programs, people who stick with it through high school. I mean, those are the people who, because of the investment that they make in that wrestling room, the entire rest of their lives will be easier.
Absolutely. And a big part of it is that it impacts your mindset. And so if you go back to your legal days, like let's say you're walking into the courtroom against Southwest or the NCAA case you had, big stuff. What kind of mindset were you carrying into that? Were you calm and relaxed, or were you like laser focused? And this is more so for some of the young professionals listening who are trying to make some jumps in their career ladder. Like what kind of mindset did you take into the office or in the courtroom back then?
Yeah, I would say more the laser focused. I think that the key to success in a negotiation, if you're a lawyer or in the business context, but lawyers are always negotiating because we're trying to settle cases. 90% of all cases will settle before trial, right? And so you get to put on your business hat as a litigator. And the mentality I always had was, if I'm prepared for anything, then I can come right down the middle. So we come back to the authenticity point. The way that I used to negotiate is I used to say, here's what's going to happen. We're offering you a price of X dollars today to settle this case. If you don't take it, tomorrow I'm going to do this. The day after that, I'm going to do this. And then we're going to go to trial. And then here's the outcome we're going to try to achieve. You're going to do your best job and try to oppose that. And good luck to you. And then if they didn't do what I said in the negotiation, I would do exactly every single thing that I promised. It wasn't a bluff. I used to always say as a lawyer, I never bluffed, ever. Because bluffing is when you say, I'm going to do X, but you're full of shit. You're not really going to do that, right? You're sort of like hoping the guy doesn't call your bluff. I would always just tell them what's going to happen. And they can do what they want to do. But that's and then people know that if they know you're serious, then they'll say, all right, well, we got a decision to make here, and that's how you get good outcomes. So yeah, the authenticity point in coming right down the middle and just having that sort of quiet confidence. You don't need to puff out your chest. You just have to say, look, I understand you're going to try to get a good outcome for your client. I think the price is X. And you're going to do what you're going to do. And if you want to try the case, then we'll try the case. I think I've got a 70% chance before a Cook County jury. You're going to do your best. Maybe you think you've got a 70% chance. We'll see. Let's see who's right. And, nothing more or less, right? And so that's the best way. You got to be prepared, and you got to know your stuff, and you got to be able and willing to do all those things. But that confidence, it goes back to the wrestling point, because I knew that we could do whatever had to be done. And generally, that's how we got good results.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm in the enterprise software world, and a lot of reps, and I've even been guilty of this. It's the end of our fiscal year in September at the company I work at. We're trying to get deals done. We'll give you a price in September. It expires in September. If you want to get the same deal, you got to buy now, or you're not going to get that pricing in October. It's really easy to extend the same pricing in October. And I got to imagine someone like yourself or some of your mentors would hold the line on that.
Absolutely. I would say always, follow through with what you said. And if you tell someone they've got 30 days to act before the price goes away, give them the 30 days. And on the 31st day, say, sorry, we told you the truth. Nothing I can do about it.
I love it. That's good advice. And there's a lot of salespeople who listen to this podcast, because every 20 guests or so will have someone like yourself on, and they all reach out telling me that they appreciate the advice. And so kind of jumping to where you're at now in your career, you're running a litigation finance firm. I didn't know a lot about that before this, but obviously you're managing money and choosing to invest that. Outside of like your actual day-to-day, for people who are listening, who are trying to get their finances in order, like what are some of like the investment philosophies that you live your life by that have allowed you to accumulate wealth and also, direct the wealth at your firm?
Yeah, so I think that our platform at Kerberos is a multi-strategy asset management platform specializing in credit. And then our flagship strategy is litigation finance markets, as you said. So, investing in lawsuits, backing law firms, specialty opportunities in litigation related markets. So, it's a specialty, sort of niche area that for me was an outgrowth of the stuff that I was doing as a lawyer. And I had a very sort of clear vision for how to build this platform and was compelled to do it. If you have an itch and, it persists and you have a vision for how to do it, at some point, you get on the train and it's throwing yourself over a cliff, so nearly 20 years later, I did it again, or 10 years later after I started my law firm. So that's what we're doing right now. As a professional investor, I think the advice I have is, the amount of commitment required to invest professionally is extensive. So if there are people out there who have platforms set up and, you can invest through their platforms, do that. Be a little careful of the do-it-yourself mentality. I think that, it's not the kind of thing that one dabbles in. People like to be in control of their money, and that's empowering. But I think that, frankly, delegating it to professionals who have platforms set up for this stuff is probably not only a wise investment, but cheaper than therapy, right? Because you'll sleep better at night, and there's benefits to that as well. So I don't know if that's stating the obvious or not, but a lot of the things that worry me are when people try to do crazy things on their own, and it's a shame when you see that happen.
That is good advice, because there was about 5 dudes in Patagonia vests when I worked at Salesforce who thought they were day traders, and every day they'd be talking about it. And I'm sure they know their stuff, but I'm of the mindset like you, like let someone else do it if they can. And kind of knowing you have all this business going on in your life and you've had in the past, what are you doing from like a health and fitness perspective, like workouts and diet? Is that something you focus on as well?
Yeah, it is. I'm very much into functional medicine and anti-aging technology, trying to work with professionals who specialize in that stuff, like not necessarily traditional Western medicine stuff, but more like cutting edge advancements in technology in medicine and science. It's actually extraordinary, like how much the world changes like every 3 years, right? So the things that seem like magic to us, or in retrospect, the things that seemed like magic in fantasy 10 years ago are now things that are just commonplace and we take for granted. And so, I'm trying to stay on the cutting edge with all of that stuff as best I can. There's only so much time in the day, but I try to hit the weights whenever I can. I actually built, I would say, a high school wrestling room equivalent in my building where I live. I commandeered the mezzanine space and basically put in custom wrestling mats in a weight room that is probably equivalent to a good high school wrestling room. So
we got to do a tour of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, you know what? You will not be disappointed. If you ever want to do a little follow up or whatever and come by in Chicago, I'll give you the tour. I've had, believe it or not, Olympic gold medalists in that room training, and so it's a great place for my son, for example, who's in 7th grade now. A good way for him to get exposed to the sport. I go in there and train when I can. When I was competing in the old man tournaments, I did the U.S. Nationals and the senior division a couple years in a row, several years ago. 1 year Greco-Roman, 1 year freestyle. So I did a lot of training in there and got in pretty good shape. It's hard to keep up. I will admit, but I go through cycles where I really make a push for it.
I would definitely take you up on that, because I live at the corner of Ashland and Irving. So I'm living in Chicago. It's not too far, and we do facility tours all the time. So it'd be cool to see a private one right in the heart of Chicago.
Yeah, for sure. No, it'll be worthwhile. And then, bring your wrestling shoes in case you want to push a little bit.
Yeah, no, let's do it. Let's get a workout in. We'll have to film a workout in there.
Yeah.
Now, when you talk about the anti-aging stuff, that's really fascinated me. I've listened to a number of guys go on Joe Rogan and talk about that. I'm sure you've read about all of them. What are some of like the 2 or 3 things that you're doing, whether it's a certain amount of sleep or hydration or anything in that realm that's helping in that cause?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of blood work, and so I'll get readings on what are my What is my body not producing enough of? What am I deficient in? That sort of stuff. And then constantly making adjustments through supplements and through diet, things like that. So, in that regard, I wouldn't say it's rocket science, but it requires a certain amount of effort in the right sort of infrastructure to police this stuff and then to know where to go to correct it. And, I probably take 100 pills a day, which sounds like a lot, but I've developed an ability to do like 25 at a time, believe it or not. Because I don't have the patience to sit there and just do, one or two. So I can do like 25 at a time. So 4 times a day, I'll take the pills down, and it's not that big of a deal. But that stuff keeps me sort of optimized. From a sleep standpoint, I try to do what I can on sleep. It's hard when you're in the business world to decompress your mind and sort of like allow yourself to sink into a deep sleep. I think that's one thing that probably lawyers in particular are challenged with, but I think that's a big aspect of it. And I try to do okay with that. Keep up the training. And then, beyond that, there's always like, cutting edge tests that they develop where you can early cancer detection, things like that. So, it's out there. It's not magic. It's just taking advantage of things which maybe exist today and they didn't exist last year and staying ahead of the curve. My current plan is to live to 140. So, I'll be 1/3 of the way there soon.
I love that kind of stuff. So many people think the same way. And like, throughout life, you don't meet many people who are outside of the box, reach and stretch and, doing crazy things like what you're doing, or like what Mike Powell's doing, building a wrestling building on the South Side. People don't think that way. And so when you come across them, it's always awesome to pick their minds. And obviously that's what we're doing with you here. I wanted to ask you about Beat the Streets. And I know you've been involved with that for a number of years, maybe even before Mike Powell, also involved with USA Wrestling. But when you look at Beat the Streets as a whole, what are you seeing right now that's really getting you excited, both with Ben Ryder on the national level and with some of the stuff in Chicago?
Yeah, I think for Beat the Streets, and particularly in Chicago with what Mike has done, I mean, the facility that they just built is really amazing. I mean, that's like one of the nicest wrestling rooms I've ever been in ever, frankly. And I know, and I've been in college wrestling rooms. I mean, so what he did over there is truly incredible. And the ability to recruit and retain kids who, might otherwise be exposed to really, dangerous environments and, make bad lifestyle choices. I mean, the fact that they're able to get into a structure like this to give them not only the ability to get in a wrestling room, but the mentorship and the sort of coaching that goes along with it, that to me is the most impressive thing. The sort of case studies for how they're able to reach kids and the things that they're able to offer them that would be just otherwise totally closed off to them. Really, really cool stuff and really inspiring. And I think it's important that we support stuff like that.
Yeah, I love how when you go in there with those kids, they're all in it together because they're going through all these tough practices together. Right. And it's like a shared suffering. And a lot of people have said that shared suffering kind of concept, but it's so true, because then you can like go up to your buddies later at school and be like, man, remember when coach did this or this and how hard it was, so there's that common bond. Whereas it's not as Mike Powell says, it's not a safe place to come and play a ping pong and eat pizza, right? You're going to come and work there. And that's the difference maker, if you ask me.
100%. No, I agree. Absolutely. So what they're doing, is amazing. And the infrastructure that they've developed in just the last several years that I've been involved is incredible.
It really is. Now, Joe, as we wind down, I have a couple rapid fire questions I've sourced from the audience, just because it's not every day we get a businessman on the show. So I figured I'd fire away. First and foremost, you're a man who loves to collect. What are some of your favorite items you've acquired over the years, whether it's like a Cuban cigar or whatever?
Yeah. So I would say number one, books, not to sound boring or unoriginal, but the truth of the matter is that I have a pretty extensive library, and I'm proud to say that I've read all the books in there, other than maybe just the last 10 or 20 that I've ordered recently. But, there's, gosh, I don't even know how much, hundreds and hundreds of books, maybe over 1,000 that I've read over the years. And I think, continuing to read and staying well read and pursuing a broad number of different, sort of educational interests, not professional education, but just, staying engaged, staying curious. I think that's one of the things that makes us stay young and energized and vibrant. So I'm proud of that. I also, more than any one particular thing, I like the fact that I have sort of an eclectic, collection of things that I've picked up over the years from traveling, or that inspired me, or that I particularly liked. I do have a couple of cool swords in the house from various periods of history. I've got a saber from Indo-Persia in the late 1600s.
Wow.
I've also got a katana from Japan in 1800s. I like that stuff because it's like living history, and it's very cool to me to think that, wow, like 400 years ago, like some guy was holding this thing right here that I'm now touching. And the other advantage is, in the event of a home invasion, I've got multiple choices for how to decapitate someone, which is
It's good to have that. Going back to the books, I love that you said that. You got to give us a couple of the ones that have been most impactful for you over the years, or even recently.
So let's see. Recently, I just read Hiroshima by John Hersey. I went to St. Viator High School in Arlington Heights, Illinois. The public school that I would have gone to in my area is John Hersey High School. And as some people may know, Hersey was famous for having written journalism for the New Yorker, which many regard as the finest piece of journalism of the 20th century. It was a full page article, or excuse me, a full issue devoted to just this one article. So basically a book.
Wow.
About Hiroshima in the aftermath. So I read that just last week and was very moved by it. He won the Pulitzer Prize for that, rightfully so. I read a lot of books on business. I like true business. So not as much like how to do X, but more like, here's a biography of whatever, Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, something where I can glean some learnings or, some insights about how those great minds thought about their businesses, which helps me think about mine. And I like reading about history, the ancient Romans, for example, the gladiators. I just read a book on the real life Spartacus, or the various individuals who may also be Spartacus collectively. There's some dispute about that, but I love reading about history. Everything repeats itself, right? So if we read about history, we can, understand our own times more effectively.
Isn't that so true? Like, look at podcasting in general. It's just the radio brought back on demand. It's like crazy to me how it does that.
Right. Exactly. All things are cyclical.
Yeah. The Hiroshima book sounds fascinating. I'll have to pick that up. On the biography front, any that stand out to you as good reads for folks who are trying to find their way or get a foothold in their career?
Let's see. Boy, you put me on the spot with that one.
No worries.
I would say the Steve Jobs one is cool because there's a lot of things in there that I think are practical for today's times. For people who are starting a business or thinking about starting a business, the way that Jobs thought about his business, he wasn't necessarily a genius at building things. His genius was in being an editor, and give me 5 options and I'll tell you which one I like the best, sort of thing. And so that's a little bit more accessible than someone who's just a pure coding genius or a pure whatever. So I think that one is worth recommending. But frankly, I would say to people, figure out what inspires you. Go to a bookstore and browse and don't be afraid to wander a little bit. I think it's fun and it keeps us young and engaged.
Yeah. So much knowledge in books. All the knowledge of the world, they say. Joe Siprut. So big fan of books myself. And a lot of people ask to compile a list of books that all the guests such as yourself have recommended. So maybe one day we'll get to that. Last question for you is there anything you do, like a habit or a routine or something you say to yourself on a daily basis that's really helped you over the years? For example, me, I love a little morning meditation. I can't live without it. And before it was a pain in the ass, now I like it. So there's a number of things I do like that, but anything in that realm that you do that you think is maybe unique to you and it's really helped you?
Yeah, I think generally I have a philosophy that anytime something goes wrong, I have what's called the 1 hour rule. Um, if I ever make a bad decision or some bad act occurs, I will allow myself 1 hour to reflect on it and to learn from it and to digest it. And then after that, move on and turn the corner and move forward and not to constantly think back and torture yourself. So every day, to the extent that anything like that occurs, I'll spend that 1 hour really thinking. And I think you could call it a sort of form of meditation, at least loosely, contemplative, thinking of a type. And then I think, all right, well, here are the learnings that I can extract from this, and let's move forward. And then I don't look back. That's really the thing that I try to hold myself to on a daily basis.
That's big because so much what holds people back, even myself, is feeling guilty about things you did 2, 3 years ago and letting it hold you back and like define who you are now.
Exactly. Yeah, it's tough to do what I'm suggesting, which is why you got to kind of hold yourself to a rule. But if you don't, you can beat yourself up, or at least those of us who tend to be, introspective and thoughtful, which is generally a very good trait to have. But that can also result in a sort of personal torture if you aren't able to really pull yourself out of it sometimes. And so I think learn from your mistakes and then move forward. I like to think that every principle, if you will, that I operate by, anything you've heard me say today, for example, every single one of those principles is really the result of having made some major mistake earlier in my career or my life, where I didn't follow that principle, and then the principle emerged from those mistakes. So what I always tell people who work for me is mistakes will happen, but the true crime is failing to learn from it, right? So take every mistake as an opportunity to learn something and become better for it.
Are there any mistakes that you can think back to that really were ones that propelled you down this path, or that maybe you didn't follow the rule on?
Too many to name, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But it happens to all every human being, right? Unless you're born in a vacuum, like at the age of So the key though is just to always be learning and always be evolving and to become better for it. So I hope it's not too vague to be helpful, but that's the truth of the matter. If it's hard to isolate any one particular thing.
No, not at all. I think it's important because one of the big themes from that is you just not beating yourself up repeatedly for days, weeks, and years. People do that all the time. It's tough to see. And that 1 hour rule, that's obviously a key piece of that.
Yeah, no, I think so.
Well, Joe, it's been an honor to have you on, sir. I was looking forward to this conversation all day. Any last words before we sign off here?
I really appreciate the chance to come on and talk with you. You've had some great guests on, so I'm honored to be included in that company. So thank you, and let's all keep supporting wrestling.
Let's do it, man. Go wrestling. I'll reach out to schedule some time for the home gym tour because people are going to be excited to see that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you very much, sir. That's the end of this episode of Wrestling Changed My Life. Thank you so much for tuning in. To see video clips from this interview, go to Instagram at Wrestling Changed My Life. As always, Wrestling Changed My Life is proudly presented by Spartan Combat. Please go to SpartanCombat.com to support this show.